So, I just got in from the goth club. And I wanted to like make this video about this topic before like certain thoughts leave my head. Um, I'm exhausted as fuck. Also, I look cute, so I figured like let's make a video. Like, it's really funny when I turn this camera on because sometimes I don't look as cute as I think I do, and sometimes I look cuter than I thought I would look. This is one of those times. This lip though, this lip though, what a mess. But okay, I'm gonna get up so y'all can like, okay, don't be perverted. No free, don't look at my feet, okay? Oh my god, holy shit, stop it. Okay. Anyway, just got in from the goth club. I'm honestly dead ass tired. I got there a lot earlier than I usually do. Like, I'm known for like getting to the club at midnight, and I got there at, I want to say, like 10 o'clock. Which is very strange for me. Very, very strange for me. But I stayed there the whole time. Oh, and also did the entire night sober because I don't have my debit card because someone stole my shit, and that's a whole other conversation. But so I was sober and dancing for like hours. There we go. All right. I say all that to just give you context for why I look like this and why I'm going to be so low energy. But like I said, I wanted to talk about this because it is a thought that I want to get out before it leaves my mind. And I'm trying to make a lot of videos like this because, as we've been talking about in the past couple of videos, I am going to be trending in a certain direction. Okay. You guys have to get that I've been talking about this for a very, 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 very long time. I am 32 years old. I turned 33 this year. And I started my YouTube channel when I was 15 years old. And pretty much the entire time I've been on YouTube, I've spoken out about transgender issues. And that's actually pretty relevant to the topic of this video, which is another aspect of genocide. The idea that the enemy is simultaneously incredibly strong, yet also very weak, right? And I'm just going to be just giving you my thoughts about this because there's been such a disconnect in this conversation, and part of why I'm pulling away from talking about this stuff is that talking about this stuff makes me feel insane, right? There's what I actually know and intimately understand, and then there's like the bullheaded narrative that is constantly in my way all the time, at every move, at every step. And one of the things that I've been trying to do on YouTube is have these conversations so that people can grow, so that people can change, address isms, and, shift things so that I would not be a person. The way that I like to look at the stuff that I've historically done is I am actively trying to create content that helps people treat people like me more kindly in the future. Right? That is the soul beneath a lot of my work. I want the world to be kinder to people like me. So let's get into this then. So I'm going to bring you back to a conversation that we had a couple weeks ago about the Aretha Franklin situation. If you've not watched my video about it, I would highly suggest it just so you understand where I'm coming from with this. But to really quickly summarize it for you guys, a couple weeks ago, there was a story about transgender people being offended by Aretha Franklin's song, the 1968 song, I got that wrong in the video, A Natural Woman. And I saw this story initially on Instagram where I was greeted by tons of people talking about how transgender people are getting out of control. They're so easily offended by everything. Everything's a problem. Everything's a conflict. They want the world to bend to their will. They want the world to, bend over backwards to accommodate them. And they don't want to accept reality. Well, I'm tired of not saying anything. Well, I'm tired of, you know, standing up for them. Oh, wait, I have a light. Why don't we turn this light on? I'm tired of hearing, oh, girl, let's turn the light off. Ah! Let's turn the light off. Okay, but this, we're tired of hearing from the transgenders. We're tired of it. We're overwhelmed. Oh my God, why are they always speaking? Oh my God, why are they always, what I mean? And what was the story actually? The story was a story that I discovered initially was posted by a website that championed Western values, right? A website whose purpose was promoting Western values. And what did they use to cite their source for this apparent trans outrage? A parody page on Twitter created by a conservative that was created to parody a transgender rights page. So this was basically a situation where conservatives manufactured outrage, right? And if you are a person who's LGBTQIA+ in any way, you probably would have heard, the title of that conversation and said immediately, like, that doesn't make any sense. Why? I mean, I know a lot of people who are LGBTQIA+ who love that song. Why is it offensive, right? It would have seemed like a thing that rang as untrue, right? But if you're the sort of person who is annoyed by the fact that transgender people exist and would like to be treated respectfully, it's an easy story for you to believe. And I believe the parody Twitter even went out of their way of saying, oh, this was parody, but isn't it funny that you can't tell the difference? Isn't it funny that you can't tell the difference between this thing that I made up and the actual needs and desires of the transgender community? Now, baked into that idea is that we live in a society that overwhelmingly accommodates transgender people, right? In order for you to believe that transgender people have too much power, you must then first believe that society at large has embraced transgender people. And why do people think this, right? They think this because in comparison to the past 5 years, they've seen more transgender people. There are more transgender characters on television. There are more transgender characters in popular, things like Marvel. I believe Marvel just announced a trans character. You're seeing it more and more and more because there's been a concerted effort in the past couple of years to make things a bit more diverse. And what a lot of people are doing is this, I forget the exact phrasing, and I'm sure someone smarter than me will be able to, put this in the comment, but I forget how exactly it goes, but there was like a study that that was done that showed that in a group full of mostly men and a few women, a lot of men interpreted the women speaking, even if they spoke less frequently, as dominating the conversation, right? Even if the room is full of 10 men and 2 women, if the women spoke more than a few times, they would interpret that as them dominating the conversation. Now, why is that? It's because they stick out a bit more than the norm, right? In a misogynistic society that believes that women should not be heard, it's easy to buy into the idea that this woman speaking at all is just taking up too much space. And I'm not here to have a conversation with you about misogyny or explain that. That might be a whole other video. I'm tired of people acting like it's not such a thing. It's baked into a lot of these conversations that we're having about trans people. It Women still don't have the right, universal right to control their biology. So like, let's stop pretending that it's a thing, right? Let's stop pretending that it's not a thing. You know, I saw this video on TikTok today that was like, how do we live in a patriarchy if women can be politicians? I'm tired of explaining this to you guys. But anyway, not the topic of the video. But the idea is, when someone is a minority and they are seen more than you're used to seeing them, it's easy to interpret them as having domination over the conversation. But that kind of rhymes. And, you know, it's interesting that people have that understanding of transgender people for me, right? Because as a transgender creator, I would say one of my biggest frustrations, one of my biggest areas of stress is the fact that I go out of my way to completely document my thoughts about things. I think I'm more prolific than a lot of people when it comes to that. I have, again, 18 years of being on YouTube, right? I started my YouTube channel doing stuff like this, making content like this, where I was just speaking to the camera. And then I did shorter content that was scripted and very, very well produced, right? Or at least well produced for the time. And I feel like more often than not, my narrative, my arguments, my thoughts are misconstrued more than they are understood. That is something that I feel very, very, very intensely. And it's something that does frustrate me. And it's, again, one of the many reasons why I'm walking away from a lot of these conversations. Because if you've paid attention to my content, you have seen me rephrase the same thing several times. And I do it because sometimes I think, if I do that, people will hear me. If I do that, people will understand where I'm coming from. If I say something, you know, if I have less makeup on and I smile and talk just like this and talk to you guys about the oppression that I experience through my daily life, if I talk to you guys, you know, in a nice, welcoming, friendly way, a way that you can definitely associate with cis women, you're going to be able to have more empathy for me, right? And that's not been the case, right? That's not been the case. What I am now, we started this conversation out with the Harry Potter stuff, right? And a lot of people are getting lost in the sauce about that particular conversation. I'll summarize it again, right? For me, the primary concern is the fact that not buying a game that indirectly supports a transphobe really requires that you do absolutely nothing, right? You just don't do a thing, right? And I'm going to repeat yet again for the people who don't hear this whenever I say it, that I think it's kind of stupid to say that buying a video game, the process of buying a video game, makes you a transphobe. But my point is that the transphobia for you clearly is not a turn off. The transphobia for you clearly does not alienate you. It does not make you feel as though this is something you just don't want to have any part in, because it's not something that's aligned with what you would like to promote in this world, right? The fact that people say, well, I really want to be entertained. And so, yeah, I know that J.K. Rowling is promoting a lot of the conversations that would remove transgender people from public space. Yeah, I get that. But I have nostalgia and I want to play the game. And here's $20. You know, here you go. And hopefully that makes up for it. Right? And the frustration I have with that is if this is asking too much, what that's effectively communicating is that you don't think the risk is big enough. You don't think that the risk of transgender people being removed from public life is actually real. You think it's just, she made some boomer tweets, a year ago or something or whatever, right? That's how you interpret it, right? But what I see and understand is that she is feeding into and normalizing and standardizing and becoming a source for this idea that the enemy is at one point so weak and at another point so strong, right? Which of course means that they're going to justify to some point that transgender people just have too much freedom, that transgender people just have too much access, right? We've got to get this, in the interest of saving Western civilization, put an end to it. I tried to point this out in my Aretha Franklin video, but it's not a coincidence that a story about transgender people being so offended and so upset about, a classic musician appears on a website advocating for Western values. That is not a coincidence, right? Central to Western values is this idea of gender assimilation, this idea that men have this one sole purpose, women have this one sole purpose, right? Part of the anti-trans arguments that you see pop up here and there is that a transgender man, who for the people who are uninformed in the audience means a person designated female at birth who identifies as a man, may be actually feeding them, medicating themselves, is sterilizing themselves, right? It is sterilizing them, which means that there's going to be less wombs in order for, especially and specifically, white children to be born in. So we have to discourage this. We have to discourage this because, well, those wombs could be used to continue Western values, right? And a lot of people don't pick up on that aspect of the conversation, but if you pay attention to, especially God, I forget the name of the book, but there's this really transphobic book that was going around about saving our daughters from the transgender, seduction or whatever. And, as an aside, there are actually some very important conversations to be had about conflating certain traumas with gender dysphoria and so that's all important, right? And I do think that those are conversations that need to be had. But that all being said, a lot of this is mongering around this idea of people who are born, who are designated female at birth, no longer being able to have children and continue on the legacy of, Western society, right? And what's crazy is if you know a transgender man, you know that hormones are not birth control, right? Does it impact your ability to reproductively function? Sure, absolutely. But taking testosterone is not going to make it impossible for you to get pregnant. It's not, right? I'm not going to get into the depths of that, but you've got this one argument based in fear mongering, that does latch on to some little bit of truth about how it does impact your ability to reproduce. And then, you've got the reality of the fact that transgender men on T are regularly told that it's not birth control, right? And that's part of the frustration I've had, right? There's always, again, this narrative in my way that I have to entertain, that I have to acknowledge, that I have to interact with. And I spent so much time counteracting that narrative. I spent so much time counteracting this idea, these ideas rather, that are projected onto transgender people, right? And what's crazy to me, and this is always going to be something that really bothers me, is that it would just actually be far easier to listen, right? I've always felt like I don't get to just say what I mean and have it taken at face value. People have to process it through, various different, frequencies before they get to the point where they might could just believe that I mean what I say, right? And it is frustrating. It is very, very, very frustrating. Um, so it's hard for me to reconcile this idea that, oh my God, everyone's listening to transgender people. Transgender people are so celebrated, so embraced, and so beloved that standing up and defending them is kind of a silly thing, right? Oh, I just noticed something about my door. My door doesn't totally fit into the doorway. That's why there's air coming through. Because I keep hearing air. I'm sorry. I'm just noticing that. This apartment's really nice, but like I just keep noticing shit. And like that's why I'm so fucking cold right now. Because it's not really. I paid too much money for this apartment. Look, y'all are gonna fix this shit, okay? Give me a new door. Pronto. Sorry for those you guys who have sensitivity to like the sound of sipping. But that, and it's really frustrating, you guys. I am so tired of having these rudimentary ABC 1, 2, 3 conversations with people. And what's frustrated me is that I've been having those conversations for so long. I do have a personality type where I will sit down and explain something to you in depth, right? I need to pull myself away from that because even though I know factually that there are plenty of you guys out there who hear what I'm saying and have learned from what I'm saying, and I know you exist. I know you're out there, right? But most people don't feel that way. And that's what's frustrating to me. The reality is most people don't understand transgender people. Most people, when pressured, probably don't actually accept transgender people, right? I think a lot of people, it's not necessarily that they have this like intense hatred of transgender people. It's more so that they don't particularly care very much about them, which I think is kind of a normal thing, right? Not everyone is probably going to care about everyone, right? Um, but I think that's the norm. The norm is that most people don't know enough about transgender people to necessarily have the most, intense opinion about it. But, what they do hear more frequently is the transphobic rhetoric that presents transgender people as wanting too much, right? Something I think a lot about is when I was coming up as a trans woman, there was something about being able to exist in a time where people had less understanding of you, right? There was something about being able to very easily fade into the background and exist in a way where, because a lot of people weren't aware of transgender people, they weren't looking for them, right? And so there were a lot of people who were able to, if they assimilated up to a certain point, very comfortably sort of exist in this way where they're not going to be, challenged or questioned, right? Whereas now people have an awareness of transgender people and they are indeed doing that. They are indeed saying, no, actually, you're not a woman, right? And with visibility, you have these issues. One second, I'm gonna check on this door because it's really bothering me. I can't believe that there's that much space above my door. Ugh, they need to fix that pronto because, like I said, I pay too much. I pay fucking too much. Okay, anyway, that's gonna really bother me. I forgot where I was. But, like the disconnect between what I know people actually feel and what actually is, and what's said about how transgender people must feel, for me at least, is very sharp. Very, very sharp, right? Like, when I looked at the Aretha Franklin thing, like, I just thought to myself, I don't know how anyone who knows trans people thinks this is true. But the reality is most people don't know trans people. They only sort of see transgender people through the lens of, trans creators on the internet, the few times, where transgender people are celebrities, and then people speaking negatively about them, right? And let's just address that really quickly. The first part. Most of the trans people you see online are going to be transgender people who have a certain status, right? They're going to be transgender people who have a certain degree of privilege, right? I'm a Black transgender woman, yes. And I've experienced a lot of bullshit, yes. And I've certainly experienced transphobia and racism and misogyny throughout my life in a way that's really negatively impacted me and definitely informed a lot of my thoughts, yes. Right? However, I was raised upper middle class. I always had access to computers and technology, which is why at 15 years old, I was able to start a YouTube channel. It's why at 17 years old, I was able to go away to animation school. It's why after I graduated from animation school, I already had the tools to do what I needed to do at home. And it's why I was able to slowly but surely build up my business where I am essentially doing what I was doing 18 years ago, right? Because I have a certain degree of privilege, right? It's very easy to look at the trans people you see on the internet and see them as, people who just have a lot of power, right? You say, oh my God, like I live in a nice apartment, right? I live in a nice apartment. I got a nice kitchen. I got, a lot of nice things because I am on paper a single person who has no children, who doesn't drive, who works for themselves, right? Right? That's what it is, right? But I still do have that privilege, right? And so I'm sure there are people who could look at, maybe my life and the lives of other transgender people online and say, "Oh my God, they have so much." But I'm not representative of most trans people. I'm not representative of the average trans person who struggles to afford their access to care. I'm not. And that's one thing I've always tried to make very clear. Right? When people talk about teenagers gaining access to hormones, right? That is something that is incredibly privileged. Something that probably isn't going to happen for the vast majority of trans kids, right? The vast majority of trans kids are never going to have access to care until they're an adult. The vast majority. But a few situations, and this is what drives me insane, a few scenarios where that is the case now becomes representative of the entire group. And what can be a little stressful about being trans in this particular aspect of the conversation is that most transgender people and cis people do not get this, want more than anything to disappear. I've spoken about this a few times, but I have a friend of mine who is a school teacher. She's a math teacher. And she is trans, but her students don't know that she's trans. The teachers don't know that she's trans. She is completely stealth, and she works with children, and she's very, very good at her job. And she exists in a way where she is essentially just invisible. And that is her happiness, right? That is where she wants to be. Now, of course, there's a lot of other types of trans people. Obviously, she's the sort of person who transitioned in a very, 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 very binary way and then assimilated, and that's not everyone, right? But I think that there's this misunderstanding where people think that the reason people are trans is sometimes not because of literally anything other than attention, fame, celebration, people bowing down and calling them the right name and things like that, right? Whereas most people who physically transition, most people who medically transition are doing it because that truly is a life-saving option for them, right? Like, it's actually really hard for me to imagine what my life could have been if I didn't transition. And that's actually part of the thing that allowed me to understand that I was trans, right? The process of me closing my eyes and trying to imagine my life not as who I am now and coming up with nothing. Nothing. And it's not because of lack of of imagination. It's because I knew I wouldn't make it, right? And so I took certain steps to be happy in my body. And what's so interesting to me is that, you have some people who on one side complain about transgender people throwing it in everyone's face, right? But then you also have people who will complain about transgender people just kind of existing and being themselves, right? Even if a trans person isn't overtly calling attention to themselves and asking for everyone to do this and do that, it is always often interpreted as that. Even the quietest trans person is a pushy, loud, egocentric, narcissistic person who wants everyone to bend to their will. And that's the thing that frustrates me. Going back to this Harry Potter shit, I've had several conversations with people that for me often just feel like I'm saying, hey, can you just not hurt us? And people often react to that very violently. Very violently. People often react to that by saying, oh my God, why are you asking for so much? Isn't the little I give you enough? Why are you so obsessed with me treating you a certain way? It just seems like you complain a lot, huh? It just seems like you complain a lot. And it's crazy because often contextually we're having these conversations with people who say that they support us, right? And then they flip it. And when it's inconvenient, when it makes them a little bit more uncomfortable than they would like to be, then it becomes, you know what, I am so tired of you people asking for so much. I don't know what I could possibly do. Nothing's ever good enough, and it becomes this whole sort of self-flagellation, boo-hoo, pity me. I've always been nice to you people kind of shit. And we're supposed to see we're supposed to hear that reaction and be like, oh my God, this poor victim. And that's the thing is transgender people, marginalized people generally, spend so much energy. God, do I know about this? They spend so much energy taking account of the ego of the so-called ally. They spend so much time trying to make sure that the way they express themselves doesn't alienate you. And then when you ask for something really simple, like don't buy a video game, right? Then you become this crazy, pushy, irrational person. And then the person who you're criticizing, who's engaging in, at the very bare minimum, promoting something that indirectly promotes harm against you, or directly promotes harm against you, you're supposed to make sure that that person feels good, that that person isn't upset, and somehow you making them upset by asking for them to do better is pushing shit too far. It's asking for too much. I think a lot of people are not going to hear what I'm saying right now. That's why when I made my video, I said, I know that people are going to think I'm a fucking conspiracy theorist, because based on the way people are reacting to this, I feel pretty confident in saying that shit's going to have to get really fucking bad, before the so-called allies, do anything that would make them seem like an ally. It's going to have to get really bad. A trans girl, 15 years old, was stabbed in broad daylight in the UK. Broad daylight. It wasn't sneaky. It wasn't, stabbed broad daylight. And even if you want to argue against the way, even if you want to say, oh, this wasn't a hate crime, oh my God, the press is misgendering her. The press is reiterating and reinforcing this idea that she was not a trans girl. She was not a girl at all. She was just a boy with delusions, and thought that he was a woman, a girl, an adult human female, which of course isn't, there's definitely some trans people who say, in my view, very crazy shit. Like, yes, I am essentially, in every single way the same as a cis woman. Like, I know, if you were, you wouldn't, like most trans people know they're not cis, right? They, take hormones every day, once a week, whatever the regimen is, to address that fact, right? But we have to engage in these conversations about how, oh my God, trans people, I hate this conversation because it's like, yes, we know that we don't have the same biology as a person designated female at birth. If we did, we would be not trans. We would be cis, right? It's very simplistic. To me, very simple, not very complicated at all. But to a lot of other people, it is one of the mysteries of the century. These conversations are always very frustrating to me because I just know they're not going anywhere, right? Like, I know that no one is, I'm not saying no one. I know there are people listening to me, but I know most people aren't, right? I know most people are not listening to me, do not care, and wouldn't, piss on me if I were on fire, right? And again, that's what's so concerning about the way that, the whole J.K. Rowling thing has gone, because you have people saying, oh, I'm such an ally. Why are trans people bullying me? This is, overstating the harm is a really big part of this thing I'm talking about, right? Overstating the harm. And J.K. Rowling loves to do that. A lot of transphobes love to do that. They will take a small criticism and transform it into transgender people want me murked. Right? Meanwhile, you've got a trans girl that gets killed in broad daylight, and the press goes out of their way to misgender her in death. Right? If we have so much power, if we have so much influence, why does that happen every time we get killed? Like, I think about this all the time, right? You guys have seen, right, me be myself for most of my life, right? You've seen me be a open trans woman for most of my life, right? If I were to die before my parents died, it wouldn't shock me if, because of how they felt about me being transgender, they decided not to respect my gender in death. And what's so bizarre to me about that specifically is most people by this point who have known me for any extended period of time have never known me by my dead name. They've never known me as anything other than who I am right now. Like, but because of the way shit works, if you're a trans person, you don't actually get to define yourself. You have to live within the confines of a cis person's understanding. Right? You just the very idea that you deserved anything other than that is kind of treated as like silly, right? It's very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating because, like, to me personally, stuff like that is some of the scariest shit ever, right? Like, I don't give a fuck about people misgendering me in, my life. I mean, it doesn't happen. It only, put it this way, it only happens on the internet. The only place I get misgendered is on the internet. The only place where people dead name me is the internet. It's so easy for me to ignore because I know that they're trying to be shitty, and it's hard for me to be triggered by, people who are trying to trigger me. That's a little hint for people. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't really give a fuck about people misgendering me in life in a lot of ways, right? It's the way that someone can take your documented legacy and just shift it and twist it and manipulate it into what they think it is, into what they would prefer to have been. Do you know how hard someone's going to have to fight to define me and present me as a man in this society? Very hard. Very hard. But that's the reality that transgender people who apparently are all powerful and influential, that's the reality of what they have to experience. Now, I'm going to be fucking transparent with you guys and say that I, just because of my media intake, have not probably been as tapped in to every aspect of the Harry Potter debate. Bitch, I've got a life. I feel like it's funny. I'm pretty sure in the past like 3 videos I've done, I've been rushing somewhere, going somewhere, making plans, late somewhere, because I have a life, bitch, okay? And you should get one too, all right? And you should get one too. But while you still can, honestly. Hell, that's part of why I go goth club dancing and things, and it's part of why I've shifted more and more away from being online as much, because what if our freedoms are taken away from us, right? What if my concerns are validated? I'll be one of the first people they come for as a person who makes content, right? What if that happens, right? Do I want to look back at this time and say, oh, I spent it justifying myself to people who I know would never get it? Or do I want to say, yeah, you know what? I want to sit. This is the dark thought I always have. If we ever end up in a situation where we're in a camp or something, I would rather sit in my camp and have pleasant memories of the time I went to the goth club and saw my friends and had a really good time than the endless argument I had justifying myself to a transphobe on the internet, frankly. That's a reality of something that's in the back of my mind all the time. But yet, transgender people are all powerful. They are so in control of the media and the government and everything. I watched a video today where I don't know all the positions of everyone, but it was, I think, a hearing for trans health or something. And there was a trans woman speaking on in the hearing, and a man who was questioning her point blank said, "Do you have a penis?" Now, it would be incredibly rude for me to sit across from a cis man and say, "Is it cut or uncut? How thick is it? Where do you like to put it?" In a conversation that we're having about prostate cancer or, I don't know, fucking Viagra or whatever. It would be rude. Why? Because we generally believe that people's genitalia is just something you don't talk about unless you plan on interacting with it, which of course is my theory. I think he's one of these dudes who likes to be, turned around, bent over, and have his back blown out. He's one of these guys who, he don't really like the post op girls. He only likes fully functional girls who know how to do it, who are total twaps, right? Sorry, let me not be mean. And there's nothing wrong with that. We support that here. We are a bottom centric space. Don't worry, you are safe here. Um but like, because transgender people are dehumanized the way they are, a common social norm is just negated completely. Transgender people don't deserve respect. They don't deserve dignity, right? They must interface with shit like this. Now, again, is that the experience of someone who is actually factoring into society in a way where they are so high and powerful and influential? Is it? Because I think he'd be a little bit more afraid of saying that. See, he said that because he knew that there were people in the audience back at home, maybe not in that room, who would applaud him for it, right? That's why he said it. He said it because he knew he could do it, and he might get some groans from the liberals in the room or whatever. But to the populace, people would applaud it. And why would they applaud it? They would applaud it because, oh, finally, someone is calling out this transgender bullshit, right? That would be the reason. And we saw those sentiments expressed quite frequently in the Aretha Franklin stuff, right? It is so frustrating to me that people don't see this. Yes, you are indeed seeing more transgender people than you did in the past. And which is crazy to me because we've always been there, right? We've always been there. But there's this just general aversion to us being there, right? Like, do you guys get that we're still not quite in a place in society where I could tell my story, where I could have the story of my life portrayed accurately, right? Transgender characters don't really get to live a life in film that reflects their actual real life. There would have to be too many conversations, too many debates, right? Like, now I'm gonna talk about this, but I'm also gonna say that I've only watched but so much of this show. I think I've watched the first season of Pose, and I remember one of the big plot lines is this married man is having sex with this trans sex worker, um, and those are the kinds of relationships that society's ready for, because they can accept that a man who is married and dealing with his identity, struggling and things like that, they can buy that these two people have a romance, right? But, I met my boyfriend. We matched on OkCupid, but then didn't speak to each other. Um, I didn't even notice because I get a lot of matches, frankly. But his introduction to me was I think we matched on OkCupid, and we had a whole conversation about it. And we met at the bar that we go to all the time where we are regulars, and everyone in the bar is aware of who we are and has seen our romance develop and spread over the, you know what I mean? Like, it's a cute story, honestly. It's a really cute little story. But is society really ready for stories like that? No, not really. Not really, right? So what I'm saying is that people are taking even these very specific types of representations that aren't exactly accurate, or not accurate, but don't exactly represent the full breadth of transgender experiences, and saying, wow, we're seeing way too much of that. Now, of course, that's kind of normal because, we are progressing as a society and baby steps, whatever, blah, 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 whatever, But I think it's important to point out, because if transgender people were in control of the media, if they were so influential, wouldn't they have more power over their own stories? Wouldn't they be able to actually not deal with the shit that I'm talking about in this video, where I'm constantly made to feel like I don't exactly have control over my own narrative? I, again, am trying to get away from talking about this because it just feels very hopeless, if I'm being honest. I truly could not give a fuck. A fuck, darling. A fuck, okay? I could not give a fuck about you playing a Harry Potter game. I understand why you would. I really do. For me, it's more like, wow. So what would qualify? So what would qualify? Because obviously, J.K. Rowling isn't out there stabbing 15-year-old transgender girls in the street. But she certainly is encouraging people to do so by feeding into the dehumanizing narrative, by overstating the harm, by, of course, presenting transgender people who, by the way, are standing up for themselves, which is something most people would do, which is like a very normal thing to do, a very well-adjusted thing to do. Like, they're treating it like it's so irrational. It's so crazy. Oh my God. You transgender people just never are happy. You're always complaining, always wanting this, always wanting more, 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 more. Right? So, what's going to happen in the future when shit gets worse? Because where I'm sitting from is, if right now you don't get it and you don't understand why people take an issue with this, that kind of tells me that the only way you would actually be moved to action is extreme violence. And why do transgender people have to experience extreme violence for you to stand up for them? Say, no, I'm not going to let this happen. I think where we're at right now, and again, as I will say every time I talk about this, is I really hope I'm wrong, is we're at the point where if people act, they probably could stop it. Probably. Maybe. But they're not gonna. They're not going to. Right? Again, don't think buying a video game makes you a terrible transphobe, but it's crazy to me that you don't think transgender people being concerned about this um, is valid enough for you to, at the very least, respect the fact that by you buying the game, you are in a lot of ways communicating to your trans friends that the transphobia doesn't alienate you. You know? And that sucks. It sucks to understand that about someone. It really, really sucks to understand that, like, oh, okay, like I really thought this person was cool, but like I guess not, right? Like I guess not, because again, it's just communicating to me that things would have to get really, really, really bad for you to finally do something. Because it's so easy to do nothing. It's so easy to just like not buy the game. I haven't ever, what's funny to me is you could not even tell me what the game looks like. I'm sure it's dark. I'm sure it's dark and grainy and, edgy, like everything. Like a lot of video games these days. I'm sure it's that, right? But I'm just not curious about it at all in any way. And that's how I've been with a lot of shit, right? Like, I'm just not curious about it because I know that the people who made it are not great. And there's just so many other pieces of media for me to play with, right? So many other pieces of media, so many others. Why would I need to cling to this one? That's the way that I look at it. But I know that the way that a lot of other people look at it is, well, I know I'm a good person because I said I was a good person. And I'm going to, maybe play this game because I want to play this game. And yeah, maybe it's going to, make my trans friend less comfortable around me. But that's just irrational because she is like a lot of other trans people who just bitches and moans all the time. So it's easy for me to ignore and dismiss. That's what it says to me, right? And so, like, whatever. Honestly, whatever. But, like, you're making a statement. And that's the thing, too, is from the bit that I've seen, there are definitely people who are, like, buying the game to make a statement. And the statement that they're making is actually, maybe, yeah, you gave some money to charity. Good for you. Okay, I'm happy. Not going to poo-poo it, right? But you also are making the statement that you're totally fine indirectly supporting transphobia. So, and again, if transgender people were so powerful, if they had so much reach, and if so many people supported them, why isn't the game bombing? Why isn't the game doing poorly? If transgender people, who are a minority, by the way, let's like actually address that, are a very, very small minority of people. If transgender people are a minority with immense power, why isn't the game bombing? Why is every little bit of review that I've seen about the game stated that like it's one of the best games ever? It's so good. In fact, it's strange because this is unlike a lot of games where, people like to bitch and moan about the quality of it. There's a lot of people who all they can say are these glowing comments about how fucking good it is, right? Why is it that that's the case? And yet transgender people are so influential, so all powerful, listened to, supported, and advocated for more than anyone else. It's not lining up, but of course it's not because it's bullshit. But they have to convince you that it's not, right? Transphobes have to convince you that it's not, which is why they fabricate stories. They make shit up so that you hear it and say, those fucking transgenders. Always bitching and moaning, never happy. Maybe I should just not support them. Anyway, guys, it is very late. How long have we been here? I've been here for an hour. Bitch, I sat down and said, I'm going to make a 20-minute video. I'm enjoying doing this, you guys. I don't want to dwell on this too much. I will one of the things I really want to start doing is I want to do a lot of like me going through TikTok videos and like talking about them, because there's a like, bitch, I feel like every time I go on TikTok I learn something new, and I want you to learn too. Anyway, bitch, I'm about to take off this makeup. I put this makeup on like 5 hours ago. I'm so annoyed. I'm gonna take my ass to bed. Okay, take my ass to bed. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.